Thank you, sir. Let everybody do their introduction. Stephen.
Testing. All right, we're good. Yeah, my name's Steve Barbour. I'm the owner and CEO of Upstream Data. Our company is basically a Bitcoin mining infrastructure company. We're best known for oil and gas related, waste gas mining. But we've sort of grown into like full services. So we've done everything from home mining market to upstream oil and gas. And I think the next phase for us, we're really going to push into sort of behind the meter, like upstream generation on the grid. And I think we want interesting facts. I guess like to use my avatar. Oh, it doesn't have the speech bubble, but that was from a Bitcoin conference. And I've sort of grown a reputation for, or an image with a mustache. So my interesting fact is somewhere in like 2018 or 2016, when I was still working for Husky Energy, because I'm an oil and gas engineer by trade, I had for charity in Lloydminster, we waxed my mustache off for the men's shelter. It was part of the Movember drive, and we took it to a new level, and I waxed it off, and I do not recommend that. It was literally a traumatizing experience, and I had a lot of regret, but it came back, as you can see. So that's me.
I'm feeling pain on your behalf right now, Stephen. My name is Erin Dermer. I am the Senior Vice President of Communications and Culture at Hut 8. We have 3 mining sites, 2 in Alberta, Lloydminster and Medicine Hat, as well as 1 in North Bay, Ontario. And we also have 5 more traditional data centers, 3 in BC and 2 in Ontario. My interesting fact, coming back to Calgary, I'm based in Vancouver, is that I lived here for a spell. I won't tell you how long ago it was, but in fact, I was a member of the Alberta bobsled team when I did live here. It spoiler alert, it was a bit of a technicality, but it still holds.
And I guess this is on. I'm Ben Harper, financial associate with Luxor Technologies. We build software and financial service products for the mining industry. Most notably, we run a mining pool, which is responsible for about 7% of the hash rate on the Bitcoin network. We also have a ASIC trading desk, help deliver hardware all across to miners all across the world, and just recently launched a hash rate derivatives business. Interesting fact about myself, I cannot grow a mustache like Steve. It's October 17th now. If I start now, I'll be ready for November 2023, I think, is my track.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ben Ganon. I'm the Chief Mining Officer at Bitfarms. We're one of the largest and oldest publicly traded Bitcoin mining companies in the world. We power just shy of 2% of the Bitcoin network across 10 different sites in 4 different countries. Personally, I've been mining Bitcoin since 2015 when I built my first Bitcoin mine in Guangzhou, China. And a little fun fact about me, despite my last name being Gagnon and working for a Quebec company, I did not know how to pronounce my last name or Quebec until I joined Bitfarms in 2020.
That is fantastic, and it is a solid mustache, Stephen. My interesting fact, I almost died on Saturday when I took Clea dirt biking, and we had a bit of an accident out in the middle of the mountains. And I'm still alive. She has not killed me yet. That's my interesting fact. It was okay. Fair enough. I understand. Well, thank you, everybody, for being here today. I guess we'll start this off. Perhaps, Stephen, this will be for you. What is the current state of Canada, and what are the biggest challenges and opportunities for Canadians in Bitcoin mining?
I won't speak about some of the other like bigger infrastructure stuff that my companions here do on the grid, but off grid, at least for oil and gas, which is our primary focus in Canada, oil and gas mining and actually oil and gas services. We're sort of a broad service company at this point around power generation and mining, but I do think there's still a lot of arbitrage to close in the call it the waste gas mining space, so the famously the flare gas mining, or less known but more important, the vent gas mining. There's definitely some niche areas that I know we haven't yet been successful addressing, because we've always gone after vent gas, for example, and we've done really well addressing that market. But there's definitely niches that I think the oil and gas industry could cover, which, for example, would be the fugitive gases and methane and natural gas that comes off of tanks. Almost every oil and gas battery facility and the like has tanks, and it has atmospheric, basically solution gas coming out. And that's a much harder problem to solve from a, just call it implementation standpoint, because you need VRU systems and the like, or you need a specifically designed tank and facility to do it. But I think the way the industry's trending, and you see the insane amount of new entrants in the market and technology coming to market in this sector, I think that's a huge opportunity. So on the oil and gas side, there's still a lot of arbitrage to close on.
And Erin, with Hut 8 and your diverse portfolio?
Well, I mean, one of the things that I was going to say is that broadly speaking, I think Canada's really flown under the radar. If you look at the number of media outlets within Canada that are actually covering Bitcoin, digital assets, and mining, they're infinitely smaller than the number of outlets that are in the US. And so I think that that's a good and a bad thing, in the sense that a lot of the industry, in the mining industry in particular, is going relatively under the radar. Yet at the same time, I think Canada's sort of ethos has always been that until the US recognizes what's going on in Canada, there's not that sense of pride. So we haven't quite cracked the nut on that yet. I think, for us, what we saw was when we listed on the NASDAQ last year, that really catapulted us into a different sphere in terms of level of awareness, types of investors, partners, et cetera. And so bottom line is, I think that we've got a great opportunity to grow from here, but we do need to start telling our story in a more meaningful way to attract some serious attention.
Yeah, so I looked up on Cambridge University does a little estimate on how much Bitcoin mining goes on in different jurisdictions. And their estimate is, at the beginning of the year, about 6.5% of Bitcoin mining happened in Canada. That's down a little bit from 10% in the summer of last year. But really, Canada is home to some of the earliest, I would say, most innovative and largest Bitcoin miners in the world, some of them which are on this stage and in this room. As a mining pool, the way that we really look at this industry is on the digital commodity side. So we run a full paper share mining pool. What that means is we calculate the expected value of hash rate, what we consider the digital commodity that powers and secures the Bitcoin blockchain, and we're able to pay out miners for the computational work that they're doing and producing. And so Canada is really, the opportunity here is that Canada is a producer of all other commodity classes, whether it be agriculture, whether it be oil and gas, renewable electricity, or lumber, just to name a few. This is just another digital commodity. This is a big opportunity. It has some unique characteristics in terms of proof of work cryptocurrencies. The commodity that you're producing is completely intermittent or flexible, in that you can shut on and off without having it impact the Bitcoin system, which is not the case for a traditional data center operation. And it's also location agnostic. All you need to sell computer power to the Bitcoin network or to a mining pool like Luxor's is an internet connection. And this is just a really big opportunity, I think, for Canada as a natural resource jurisdiction. And I think outside of proof of work and outside of mining, as we move through the 21st century, whether it's high power computing or video rendering, other applications of cloud computing, there will be digital resources that are needed in international markets. And the jurisdictions that are most competitively able to produce it are going to be the ones that capitalize economically. In terms of challenges, I think we have a great story to tell as an industry. It's about getting it out there. We need to engage with the public. We need to engage with regulators and politicians, and we need to be engaging with the private sector. There's a lot of misinformation, particularly around Bitcoin mining and energy use, that I think is not true. And I think we just need to, as an industry, be front and center telling our kind of positive story.
Yeah, I think if you would have looked at where you want to go 5 years ago and set up a Bitcoin mine or a Bitcoin business, you would have chose Canada over the US hands down. But over the last couple of years, Canada has started making Bitcoin a really divisive issue. And we're at an impasse now. Something needs to be decided here, and I think a lot of education work needs to be done in order to inform everybody what Bitcoin really is. You've got two sides here that have a completely different view of the subject of this country and of the direction it wants to go. And just like every other issue, Bitcoin has become highly polarized. But Bitcoin should be a unifying issue, and it is a unifying issue. It has different benefits to both sides, and both sides can benefit from integration and adoption of this technology. And this country, I think, really needs to learn up more about what Bitcoin is doing, the impact it's having in the communities and the areas that these companies are operating in, and what the true benefits are. Because if you look at what these companies are doing, companies on stage, the other companies that are in Canada doing great work with Bitcoin, you see that it's having a tremendous impact. And when this country starts to remember that this is an energy nation and Bitcoin is digital energy and just a way for this country to access a global marketplace for its energy that it's cut itself off from, I think this country is going to be able to grow in ways that just don't really seem possible right now.
Absolutely. And just to feed off what you're saying there, probably Ben, Harper, this might be, start with you here. Why is Canada well positioned to thrive in this sector, and what benefits in this sector is the sector bringing to Canada?
Yeah, so Canada has a bunch of competitive advantages in Bitcoin mining and compute resources. Namely, we have lots of low cost and in many cases stranded energy. The kind of the key input for mining or any compute commodity, about 85% of your costs come from electricity. So you're always on the hunt for the cheapest source of power. The second is you need a highly skilled workforce. That's something that we have in Canada. We have tons of know-how, particularly on the energy side here in Western Canada. We have a fairly stable regulatory and political environment compared to the rest of the world, particularly other energy producing jurisdictions. And finally, our cold climate's usually a disadvantage, but if you ever visit one of these data centers, they tend to run really hot and the computers run better in cold weather. So that's another natural advantage that we have here. And so I think that's why you're seeing Bitcoin miners set up in Canada. I think those sort of four things there.
Cold and dry.
Yeah, exactly.
I just want to make one comment. Like an interesting thing to me is that the regulatory uncertainty and some of the challenges we have here, it actually creates, in some cases, like an arbitrage. So again, I'll just relate it to oil, but we have customers, say in the US, and they might be in a state like Texas, and they don't have, say, a carbon tax or something applied to the use of gas for stranded gas mining. So if ignoring the debate on whether stranded gas mining, that is like mining off sitting gas wells, is good or bad, what it does in Canada, because there's a carbon tax, or if it's a flare site and you have to pay a carbon tax on stationary power generation, if you mine Bitcoin up here on it, you can basically alleviate that liability to the oil company. Like for example, if you cannot produce oil because you're only limited to how much you can vent, and you get rid of that vent rate, so they're not reporting it as a vent, well, that regulation actually incentivizes the oil producer to say, work with us, and therefore buy our equipment when they otherwise wouldn't, because it's the only thing that can get them compliant. Because if you buy a flare instead of a Bitcoin mine, for example, the flare is still reported as a flare. The Bitcoin mine is reported as a sale. So like in jurisdictions like Canada, where it can be restrictive because they're bringing in carbon tax, and you could argue that on a net that's been bad for the Bitcoin mining industry. There's plenty of cases where it absolutely has stifled Bitcoin mining in general, even in the oil and gas side of things. It does create arbitrage, and in some cases actually creates a business for us, which isn't the best thing, but it's an arbitrage someone has to fill.
If you look at how big this network is and what it actually consumes, you'll realize that Canada just has tremendous amount of resources. I think what most people realize when they look at Bitcoin mining is they'll read articles, Bitcoin consumes as much electricity as Argentina, but they have no idea how much electricity that is. And they have no idea where electricity even comes from, or how it's different from energy, and what is wasted in the process. In the province of Quebec, where we have a number of different mining sites, which 7 of our mining sites in Quebec are former industrial buildings, which have been vacant for years or in some cases decades because nobody wants to invest in the province. Nobody wants to do any manufacturing in the province. All this hydroelectric infrastructure that was built up to power old heavy industry like aluminum smelting, timber mills, paper mills, all this stuff is gone. It's been outsourced to other countries, but the dams are still there, the water still falls, and the power is still being generated. And so there's a situation now where you have this huge surplus resource that you have no demand for. Even Hydro-Quebec will state in their own report that they waste 40 terawatt hours of energy every single year by spilling it over the sides of the dam because they have no ability to sell that power to market. 40 terawatt hours a year is equivalent to 4.5 gigawatts of constant production. The entire Bitcoin network consumes about 10 gigawatts right now. And this energy is built. The infrastructure is there. We are wasting an opportunity that is just sitting right here for Canadians to invest in, create jobs, better monetize this infrastructure and these assets, create greater GDP, more tax revenues. This is a slam dunk win for Canada. And it doesn't matter if you're in Alberta and you're talking about excess oil and gas, if you're talking about Hydro-Quebec and excess hydropower resources. This country is filled to the brim with an energy infrastructure that is not being properly utilized. And that's the opportunity here, is coming in, taking advantage of these inefficiencies that regulation has created and monetizing them again.
And there is an argument's sake about grid balancing with the excess energy that comes around, during off-peak hours and things of that nature.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, in terms of grid balancing, we can get economically incentivized to give our energy back to the grid at peak demand. And it takes us literally seconds to power down, and it takes us 1 to 2 minutes to power back up. And that's, again, one of the stories that's not getting told. And I think just to tie what my compadres were saying it into a bit of a bow, anytime you've got an industry that is so dependent upon power and energy, there's automatically an incentivized level of innovation. It's going to spur innovation. The pilots that you were talking about, we are here to do the proofs of concepts and do the trials and see what works and then scale that up. And in terms of economic benefit, innovation, job creation, that really stands to benefit Canada in a massive way, and also align with political aspirations in that regard.
And that's a really good segue to our next question. I don't know, maybe I can continue on here. During this time of economic uncertainty, most provinces are focused on increasing jobs. How can Bitcoin mining play a part of this? And also, can they provide meaningful work?
Yeah, absolutely is the short answer for us. So we started out as a pure play Bitcoin miner and are one of the oldest and the largest Bitcoin miners in the industry. In January of this year, we closed a deal because of the prosperity that we were able to generate on the Bitcoin mining side. We went and purchased 5 data centers and effectively doubled our workforce in doing so. And the idea being that these data centers, and I know it's sort of an interchangeable term, so just to put a fine point on it, we do co-location, cloud services within these data centers. And the vision and what we're doing now is building out the infrastructure specifically to support blockchain and Web 3.0 technology, which tend to have higher performance computing requirements than your traditional co-location or cloud data centers. We're doing this under the understanding that a lot of blockchain companies, their only option is really to go to the Googles or the Amazons. But we are what we would call crypto native, and really have built some great relationships in the industry and are bringing partners into Canada to try and build out this very, very nascent space so that we can continue to have more job creation. We're so at the beginning of where I think, and I think generally speaking, we can go as an industry. It's hard to say, but if you're not going to invest in building out that infrastructure, we won't know how far we can actually go.
Yeah, I mean, the job creation aspect is a really important aspect here that applies to everybody. And in Quebec alone, we employ over 100 employees, and not a single one of them is in Montreal City. these are all rural, remote tech jobs where the value of those jobs is so important to the communities that we operate in that we now have mayors from all over the province coming out to us and saying, hey, look, we've seen what you've done in Sherbrooke. We've seen what you've done in Cowansville and Magog and all these different cities that we operate in. And they're saying, we've got a similar situation here in our town. Can you come and do the same thing here? And in the local communities in which we operate, those tech jobs are really valued. The impact that we have on the tax revenues are very valued by the local city. Really, the problem that we're seeing is on the federal level, where they're so disconnected from those rural communities in which we're operating that they don't see the positive impacts that all these jobs are having in those communities. And so I think that's a really important part that people need to understand is that these are good jobs, these are high paying jobs, and they're happening in places where nobody else is willing to invest.
Yeah, on our standpoint at Upstream, I mean, we're fluctuating between 40 and 50 employees, so that's direct jobs, which we're very proud of, and it's all mostly local Lloydminster community, good paying jobs. I mean, this is an oil field town in particular, so you have to pay pretty decent to get good staff, and that's direct jobs. I mean, there's indirect jobs, like Bitcoin mining has always been criticized specifically for low job count because, you know, you're just plugging in computers and most of the time they're running and the like, but there's a lot of indirect benefits, whether it's suppliers for us, like contractors, if it's like parts people that supply us for manufacturing buildings or engines. I mean, the indirect jobs are significant as well. So I've seen only good come out of Bitcoin mining, and unfortunately it gets a lot of bad rap. But as it relates to Canada, I mean, between the hydro surplus that we have just flowing down the river, that the infrastructure's there, you just got to flip the switch over to Bitcoin mining. And oil field, of course, that's a big part of Canadian energy. On an energy basis per capita, I guarantee you there's nowhere anywhere close than us in terms of surplus waste energy. And you know, Texas gets all the credit and it's like the mining mecca. But if there was a bit more, I would say regulatory certainty and maybe proactive, whether it's politicians or special interest groups like I know Ben's a part of and might touch on, but advancing the agenda in Canada, we would dominate the world, I believe, on at least on the cryptocurrency side of this discussion. So.
Yeah, and I think that the job point, there is some criticism, but the proof is really in the pudding. There's, between the companies on this stage, there's hundreds of jobs. You look at the industry as a whole, there's thousands across Canada. And this is something that, you know, 10, 12 years ago, nobody was doing. Maybe Dave Bradley, if he's in the audience somewhere, was the only guy. So I think that over time, it's just going to continue to bear fruit and prove itself. And a lot of these jobs, like they're saying, are in rural communities where there's not as much opportunity. And in the oil and gas sector, right? There are people that are leaving the oil and gas sector and able to transfer those skills into a data center site at a Bitcoin mine. And so I think that's, you know, very interesting and positive for the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the argument's sake that this infrastructure we're creating and building is longevity, has use cases down the road. And Stephen, this is going to be towards you here. Sorry. Canada is an energy nation. How can this benefit Canada's conventional and renewable energy sector?
Sorry, can you repeat the first part of that? What was it?
Canada is an energy nation.
Yeah.
You mentioned. How can this benefit Canada's conventional and renewable energy sector?
Well, I see. I mean, whether renewable, I mean, Ben and Erin, I think you guys have some renewable projects. Maybe speak better to it. With our company, though, because we're an infrastructure-focused company, unlike Ben and Erin, like we're not really a self-miner. We're more about building shovels for the miners, but we are making a push towards, especially like we'll make a bit more of a marketing push towards like upstream generation. So any assets that are already generating power, like we want to tie in with them. That's not like a new thing, but for our company, like it'll be more of our focus in the near term. Because I see it like whether it's renewable or if it's fossil fuels, people that know me as a very pro fossil fuel individual, but there seems to be a good narrative and like push in the mining industry to get towards upstream renewables. So like whether it's wind or solar curtailment, which is challenging from an engineering perspective, but there's a lot of companies doing it, and I think they're doing well. So we're looking to support them, but also the sort of the little guy, well, not maybe not the little guy in the room, the one that gets beat up, like even coal power generation is going to be something we shift a lot of focus to, and that is counterintuitive to people. But coal plants, because of what has been happening in the transition, because of their capacity factors are dropping, they're actually becoming less efficient, because coal plants, for example, they burn fuel less efficient if they're not loaded up. And so a base load on coal-fired power plants upstream behind the meter, there's a good case for it on just pure energy balancing. So that entire narrative around energy balancing, the big miners downstream of the grid switching off when needed to release, give up their demand for other users on the market. But that can all be done upstream at the coal plant or at the baseload plant, whatever it is. It doesn't really matter if it's nuclear. It doesn't really matter. So for us, I'm going to be making a big push in my company to focus on that. And I just think there's a huge opportunity there. So it's sort of across the board. Bitcoin mining doesn't discriminate. It's whatever energy output you have, if it's being wasted, curtailed, or if there's inefficiency, Bitcoin mining is an arbitrage. So it really just closes those gaps wherever those inefficiencies are, and they're pretty much everywhere.
For us, our data centers are 96% and up based in nuclear and hydropower, being in Ontario and BC. Our mines are on natural gas. And I think one of the big things that we need to crack the code on between business and regulators is really figuring out how to partner successfully on things like solar projects. So we're a publicly traded organization. Our shareholders are not going to be interested in us having to put up the CapEx and multiple millions of dollars to build out an entire solar farm that is also attached to a 10 or 20-year agreement associated with it. So we need to have, until we get that level of flexibility, we're really not going to be striking distance from innovating on that side of things.
The reason why Canada has such low-cost energy is because it's cut itself off from international markets. It was easier to build a pipeline in 1970s than it is today. And it's not because the technology has gotten worse. It's not because we have less skilled labor today. It's because we purposely cut ourselves off. And this is true for gas. It's true for LNG. It's true for hydroelectricity in Quebec. This country has cut itself off from international markets, and that's why you see the price discrepancy from Henry Hub and natural gas markets in Alberta widen every single year, year after year. This is a problem that can be fixed, and Bitcoin is a solution to that problem. This is a way that you can access international markets without waiting for the years or the decades now for that infrastructure to be built. And by doing so, you're going to be able to achieve higher prices for your energy, driving higher profitability for your companies, creating more jobs and more growth in Canada. And this is something that benefits everybody in Canada. It's a pretty shocking and remarkable situation that Canada has somehow put itself into. Even with natural gas prices spiking all over the world, Canada has no ability to directly sell LNG to Europe. Why is that? There's 11 different LNG plants that have been put on the books as projects to be built, and not a single one of them is built. Why is that? Bitcoin is a solution to help bypass that and reach those international markets to give you the highest value for your units of energy. It doesn't matter if it's hydro, gas, or whatever it is. And that digital infrastructure is incredibly valuable. And if we can integrate it in at greater and greater effect across this country, everybody's going to be better off.
Yeah, so thinking of hash rate, what miners are producing as a commodity, I think that the two kind of key characteristics that I highlighted before, right, were it's completely flexible in that you can ramp up and down without impacting the Bitcoin network, and it's location agnostic as long as you have an internet connection. And this is really, I think, going to revolutionize energy systems and the way we think about environmental sustainability. And it's that ability to soak up that excess, that waste, and monetize it on international markets that's really a game changer. A couple examples. For people that aren't familiar, Steve's company does a lot of upstream, works with a lot of upstream oil and gas producers. A lot of the time in an oil well, there'll be excess gas that comes out. of the well. That gas doesn't have is not a monetary incentive to take it to market if you're too far, and so it's often flared or vented right into the atmosphere, right? So Bitcoin miners are coming in, often taking that low price gas and turning it into a monetary incentive in small mobile containers. I think that's a really interesting application of showing we had this waste beforehand. Bitcoin miners were able to come in, monetize that waste, get the product to international markets, right? Another application where this matters is renewables. Big problem with wind and solar is, local electricity prices are often local. And sometimes in a highly windy, highly sunny place, think West Texas, there can be so much excess energy production at certain times that prices can go negative. And if you're looking to build out infrastructure, that's a real downside in terms of building out that infrastructure. But if you have a co-located Bitcoin mining site, you now have a global floor price on your electricity and your power that you can choose to sell to and increase the economics of your infrastructure build out and actually incentivize the build out of more renewables. And the other good example from Texas is in terms of grid stability. They had a huge catastrophic event with their grid in 2021, and the governor brought in a bunch of Bitcoin miners, just after the China ban, who built a whole bunch of new generation capacity. But then at peak hours in the middle of the summer, when everybody needs power, they're shutting down and selling gigawatts of power back into the grid. And so these are just some of the more headline catchy innovations that are going on. But I think as time goes on, we're going to find more and more really interesting applications, and it's going to tie more and more into our energy systems and rethink kind of how we think about environmental and energy system sustainability.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's fascinating here in Alberta on our facility construction. A lot of the time, we'll put in power plants that maybe geared out for phase 1, 2, 3, and 4. And Stephen, you'll know this as well. But phase 2 or maybe 3 and 4 were never developed. So there's actually already an abundance of energy, and we do apply load banks, which essentially that's how I got into mining myself. Was just it's a toaster oven, same thing, to balance the grid system. And there's an abundance of energy today in Alberta, more so than what's produced on the grid. Islanded and trapped like that, and thanks to Starlink, that's definitely opening things up. To move on, Canada is a highly stable place to do business. What are some strategies of how miners can build a successful business in provinces like Alberta, Ontario, and Quebec? Mr. Ganon?
I think the opportunity here is to find those pockets of inefficiencies in the market and take advantage of those. That's what we're doing in Quebec with hydroelectric resources. We're not going up there and building out a new hydroelectric dam. We're not going out and trying to set up a 1 gigawatt plant. We're taking over these former industrial sites where the infrastructure has already been built, constructed, paid for, and amortized over 30 years, right? It's there, it's used, and it just needs to be remonetized and optimized. And it's in those areas where you can minimize your capital expenditure and take advantage of an existing asset and repurpose it to greater effect that you're probably going to have the biggest impact and the best return on your investment. And so, that is true irregardless of which province you're in. It's just going to be different sources of power. It's going to be different kind of pockets of energy that you're tapping into. And by engaging in that way, you can demonstrate really on a local level the impacts that you're having, the successful business model that you can deploy. And I think that is how you build something bigger and better over time. And once that has been established, you can use that to demonstrate and to educate with policymakers and regulators. This is exactly the impact that we're having and could be having even more if we were, worked with as an industry, and if we could expand without, further headwinds, further setbacks, and a bunch of red tape. And so really, I think it's go out there, find those market inefficiencies, tap into them, develop them, monetize them, and demonstrate that this is a model that is workable, financially positive, and is going to have a huge scalable impact in your area.
I did just get the 10-minute notice, everybody.
I was just gonna say you started with Canada is a highly stable place to do business. I just like the perspective I have is different just because maybe I got the oil and gas mindset where I've changed in politics, like completely rug pulls you, right? Because I was working in oil before the Liberals got in power, and then what happened, like divestment out of the country in the billions, like especially in the oil sands. So there's different perspective, but I think like from pure Bitcoin mining standpoint, I think regulatory certainty, if we had that here, like whether it was like province wide, like, okay, you can invest in Alberta and Saskatchewan, and you're not going to get rug pulled no matter what happens politically. You would see a huge change in certainly foreign investment, because foreign investment is going to be how this country ends up growing economically. So I mean, I don't know who in the crowd is like representing regulators, or I always say this when I'm on a call with if it's an Alberta energy regulator or something, is like there's just because they actually did put out some information related to, say, cryptocurrency mining and oil field recently. And I said, that's a great thing, because if you just provide certainty to the market and we're not guessing, then we can actually start investing, right, in our companies, our own companies, and how we do business. So, I mean, that to me is probably the most important thing in my little niche side of this industry. If there was a bit more certainty, you would see a lot more. And I think everyone here could probably relate to that. Like, I think, Ben, you guys were in Quebec before the moratorium, right? And things were golden. Quebec was the Mecca, maybe the Mecca for Bitcoin mining it was going to be. And then all of a sudden, there was some kind of moratorium that was put in place that you know much more about. But it's those kind of things, like those rug pulls, that just create massive capital misallocation.
Yeah, I mean, we had a situation in Quebec back in 2017 and 2018, right after the last bull market rally, where there was 16 gigawatts of power applications submitted to Hydro-Quebec. Now, if you go back and look at how much power the entire network was consuming at the time, it was about 4 gigawatts, right? But Hydro-Quebec receives 16 or 18 gigawatts worth of power applications, and they freak out. And they say, oh no, if all of these power applications get fulfilled, we're not going to have any more power. But there's a big difference between power applications and power applications that actually materialize into a real project, right? These are projects that take years to advance, to go through the regulatory studies, the load balancing studies, to actually raise the capital, to build out the infrastructure. I mean, it's a years, maybe decades process. And so when you submit these applications, you're submitting them in a huge number, right? And the vast majority will never materialize. We have the exact same thing in Texas right now. There's 33 gigawatts worth of applications in Texas. The network's consuming about 10 gigawatts worth of applications. People are saying, well, Texas is not going to have enough power because of all these Bitcoin miners consuming 33 gigawatts. I mean, it's closer to one, in actuality. But reality and fiction is just completely separated right now. And so Quebec put in a moratorium at 300 megawatts 5 years ago, or almost 5 years ago. We still have not actually reached that level of build out in Quebec. We're still sub 300 megawatts. And in the meantime, they're playing all these games. So we have political games right now between the head of Hydro-Quebec, Sophie Bouchou, and we have the Minister of Finance and the Innovation Minister, and they're battling it out. Meanwhile, we're spilling 4.5 gigawatts of power over the side of the dam every single day. And the stated policy in Hydro-Quebec is, we will need this power in 2040. So better not use it now.
I knew I'd trigger you with that.
And I think one of the biggest risks that we're running into is that we're in an environment where mining has become highly political. And we're seeing that to a degree in the U.S. That New York State is potentially going to move on a moratorium after the midterms. We've seen the moratorium in Quebec. I think Alberta, in the absence of leadership from the federal government at this stage, the sandbox that Alberta's created is an excellent model. They are stepping out and stepping up and saying, come to Alberta and we'll innovate together. I think that that's an excellent model that Ontario should be looking at adopting, that Quebec, BC, all as very power-rich jurisdictions, can really generate a lot of economic prowess from, for lack of a better term. And I think, on a federal level, if the federal government spent, a tenth of the time trying to attract the tech jobs that they've been attracting over the last several decades from the US up into Canada and transpose that into the blockchain and Bitcoin industry, we'd be in a much, much more beneficial position than we are today.
Yeah, and I think on the regulatory side, a lot of people, well, what do politicians need to do? Steve's throwing around the term regulatory certainty. We have such a competitive advantage in this space. What Canada really just needs to do is treat Bitcoin miners fairly, like every other business. What you have going on across the country is Bitcoin miners and digital asset miners in particular being singled out separately from all other industries and energy users and treated differently and discriminatorily. Example, at the federal level, there's a proposal from Finance Canada to deem Bitcoin miners non-commercial activity. This, despite the fact that they employ thousands of people across the country, and the implications of that is that Bitcoin miners wouldn't be able to receive tax credits like any other business, right? In Quebec, you have them withholding electricity allotments, as Ben said, specifically because these are Bitcoin miners and no other reason. In Ontario, there's a proposal to exclude Bitcoin miners from demand response, which is ridiculous given how flexible of a resource is and what Texas is doing. And in all these cases, these is just Bitcoin mining being singled out and discriminated against. And that's really what's holding back our potential, because you don't need to do much. We have all the pieces in place. If we just let Bitcoin miners set up, do their activity, don't discriminate against them, and treat them different than all other businesses, I think this country's ready to thrive.
And arguably Christmas lights. That never seemed to be a topic of contention. I think from here, what we're going to do is turn to the audience for any questions for any of our panelists. Eric.
I just wanted to, an obvious attack vector on Bitcoin right now is this massive mob of woke climatards that believe energy consumption is a horrible thing and that civilization should simply exist without energy consumption. What position will you in your companies that you run, and what do you think is going to happen in the industry as a whole to protect and to, I guess, have counter information to these very, very dedicated crusaders?
That's my buddy Eric there. I was going to try to warn you not to give him the mic, but no, good question, man. I know my position, and we do a lot of, call it methane emissions reduction stuff, but we don't lean into the carbon reduction aspect of it. I mean, it's something that's part and parcel of it, but we don't lean into it because I find that carbon accounting thing is a moving goalpost, and it seems to always shift. And for us, the narrative, even early days, I did lean into the carbon reduction aspect, and then I lately, especially in the last couple of years, switched to talking and focusing on what I think matters more, which is waste reduction, like resource waste reduction, whatever that is. I mean, if it's energy itself, reducing that, what's being wasted. If it's like in manufacturing and you go build out a bunch of stuff, but it never gets deployed. I mean, like famously, I've used the example, like there's ghost cities in Asia, like in China, they built cities that no one occupies. Like that's waste, and that is really what matters. So our framing and my company framing is purely waste and optimization, like efficiency. And any engineer actually just does that. That's the job. That's engineering. It's building for optimizing facilities and minimizing waste. The carbon thing is shifted the market way off track. And everyone, and one thing I'll just use my podium now just to say like one thing I don't like seeing in the mining industry, which everyone sort of does, is lean into the carbon reduction aspect of their business. And that's great. But that's not the only factor that matters. Like, energy prices going up across the globe, especially in Europe, they went off like natural gas and it was dirty until recently. Now it's green again because they need it. So it's now labeled as green. If they never used that carbon accounting metric as their sole source of, call it energy infrastructure investment, like divesting off of whether it's coal or natural gas or whatever, they might not be in the situation they're in. And I think we need to go back to base engineering and energy optimization. So that's like our company's philosophy on that question.
I think the vast majority of data out there on the environmental impact of Bitcoin mining is just fraudulent. It's really, really biased and really, really bad science. It's not even science. It's pseudoscience or anti-science. The methodology that everybody or the index that everybody talks about mostly is Digiconomist. I've written about this guy numerous times. You can double check his math. It is just flat out wrong. As the network went down from the China mining ban last year, and we saw a 50% reduction in the network hash rate, he said the power estimates for the network doubled. So the network became less efficient as we had the best economic incentives ever and no infrastructure to plug in miners. I mean, a lot of this data can be proven wrong, but people don't want to actually check the data. They just want to cite a source. And, as a company that started all on hydro, we only turned on our first nat gas operation about a couple weeks ago. We've mined over 16,000 Bitcoins with excess hydropower in Quebec in over 5 years. And when these articles come out about the environmental impacts of Bitcoin mining, we get all sorts of calls saying, why is Bitcoin mining dirty? And I've spent hours talking with mainstream news journalists about why Bitcoin mining is not dirty, why Bitcoin mining is actually providing the only natural economic incentive to reduce waste and reduce your emissions without a government subsidy. And by attacking Bitcoin mining, you're actually going to increase emissions by removing that incentive. And they say, oh, well, that's interesting, but that's not the story we want to write. And so for years, our industry, I think, has wanted to hide under the table. And we've kind of just wanted to just kind of get by unnoticed. But those days are over. And the Bitcoin miners are big now. We're industrial sized, we're public, we're raising huge amounts of capital, we're employing huge amounts of people, and we are not going to be quiet anymore. And so now we are going to be changing this narrative, and we are going to be engaging, and we are doing that now, and we are going to have positive impacts. And when the education comes out, when people see that all this data that's been driving this for so long is completely fraudulent, I will say that one more time, completely fraudulent. I think we're going to start realizing, that this is the biggest opportunity that Canada has seen in a long time, because Bitcoin mining is the most disruptive thing that's happened to energy markets since electricity was invented.
And it comes down to education. And I think collectively we've spent quite a bit of time together working on trying to educate decision makers, policymakers, elected officials, but also people that are just your everyday person who they are going to pick up the highly sensational and conflict-driven media articles about how Bitcoin mining is bad. And so it's very much incumbent upon us to be running the education and explaining the benefits that we're providing.
Absolutely. And we'll take one more question from the audience here.
All right, this is working. I'm representing Newhawk. We're a First Nations community, and we're from Gaspé. So I hear a lot about like utility and government for like use of energy, but Indigenous people, First Nations people, are actually the second largest holders of clean energy. And I'm just curious to understand what kind of work you're doing with our communities to take advantage of this, because we have excess energy that we're willing to give, but it seems like no one's approaching us.
I've never met you before, but please come up to me after this panel is over.
Agreed.
Yeah, we'd love to speak with you about those different opportunities. We're looking for opportunities to expand in Canada all the time. So